All right, well, I'm excited to jump into the Q&A portion of our webinar, Measuring the Right Things here. If you're just joining us, I'm Kirby Steen with the Manufacturers Alliance. This is Christy Strong with Boston Scientific and Troy Pearson with Integer. Thank you both so much for joining me for a handful of questions here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Happy to be here. It's been a long time since we've spent time together. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be able to kind of get reacquainted and get caught up.
Yes.
Okay, here's the first question for you guys. You guys shared in your presentations a lot of what works, some of what doesn't. First question for you, what metrics have you used? Christy, I'll kick it to you first, that maybe didn't drive the behaviors that you thought it would.
Yeah. The one that I talked about even in my presentation was around our labor efficiency. So that had been a big metric for us when we first began our lean journey. And as we measured that, we realized there were a lot of the inputs that could be massaged. And so we had to be really attentive to things like training hours and vacation hours and where the measurements were coming from, whether they're coming from Kronos or a certain manufacturing system or out of a spreadsheet, and making sure we were really consistent with that. So I feel like we experienced a lot of waste in the organization as everyone was trying to figure out how do they optimize their results. And we just had to really understand what was really happening on the floor and what people were doing to calculate their metrics, what were they doing to kind of make sure they looked really good, and then put in some of those countermeasures in place. So overall, it was the right metric to measure labor efficiency, but making sure we really understood and were aligned across the organization of how are we calculating that, what's okay to do and not do to make sure that we're really seeing over time if we're improving or not improving, and it wasn't false.
Yeah, so you get a clear, accurate picture of what's going on. Troy, what would you add?
A lot of manufacturing organizations track number of defects, not necessarily what percentage those are of the good product. So just pure defect quantities oftentimes are tracked. And I'm going to flip it a little bit on you. There are a lot of metrics that companies don't necessarily do very well in tracking that can lead to a lot of wrong behaviors. The one in particular that really comes to mind that I've seen a lot is a lot of companies do not do a very good job of actually tracking and or quantifying the true cost of quality. So they may be tracking defects, they may be tracking how many hours did we lose, what's our scrap rate, what's the value of that scrap, but failed to actually acknowledge that all of the hours of quality engineering, all the hours of inspection, and all of those other hours and all of that other effort is true cost of quality. And oftentimes organizations just completely overlook that. It's important that we recognize that no inspections ever actually add any value to product. For those of us that operate in regulated industry, it's one of those necessary evils, because without paperwork you can't sell the parts, right? So we need to try to find that right balance of how much effort do we put into meeting the regulatory requirements, but where do we stop it at? We're just throwing more and more inspection in rather than figuring out, are we using the right metrics to track how are we doing?
Right.
So that oftentimes ties us back into SPC, and a lot of organizations collect SPC data, but don't actually use it very well in driving their decision making and driving how do we manage our cost of quality.
Do you have one nugget that you could share for those that have SPC data? Maybe there's even a control chart, but they need to know at what point in time should they act, or just realize that that process is going through normal variation.
That's something that's very often missed. If you've got a high capability process that's running a CPK greater than 1.33, or in some cases, and some of the things we do, considerably higher, and yet we go and throw a ton of engineering effort into trying to go research and dig into what was the root cause of a problem because we had a handful of defects that came out of a specific lot. And you look at it and go, okay, wait a minute. Did anybody think about the ROI on the quality time and the quality effort that is going into researching what that defect was?
Yeah.
When we're running a process that could be a 2.0 or even higher CPK. And you go, well, okay, everybody needs to stop here for a moment and think, are we actually spending the right amount of effort going down the right path?
What I like to say, and often I'll get feedback on this because it's kind of a cheesy thing to say, but is the juice worth the squeeze?
Absolutely.
You know, and so it also makes me think about scorecards, how you have multiple metrics that say, well, if this, should we do that? And help get that total picture again. How have you, I'll get this next question over to you first, found balance among scorecards so that they equal each other out, or it gives you a holistic picture to look at as a leader?
I think one of the things that we really try to work on is ensuring that we're monitoring the people side of things. Both Christy in her presentation and in my presentation, we both talked about engagement with your folks, right? And I think if you're not following that engagement piece or implementing that engagement piece, you can very easily find yourself in no longer having a sustainable business model. We're doing all the right things. We're shipping product on time. We're doing all of these things. We've got processes that generally work, and we've been doing it for a really long time, but a lot of organizations, especially in the last, say, 6 years or so, since the pandemic, have been really, really struggling with how to retain people. And a lot of companies during that period of time saw associates jumping ship because every company was struggling to keep people. And so a lot of the competitors in the space were offering a few dollars more per hour, and people were just jumping. Well, you're right. A little bit of money is not going to necessarily lose one of your employees if they're happy. There's the engagement piece of, are they loyal? The loyalty, the engagement, do they feel valued? That goes so much farther than just what's the dollars.
One of my favorite topics, it kind of goes outside the scope of this, but one of my favorite topics is recognition, but specifically recognition that's so good it helps you retain your talent.
Absolutely.
But you got to know every individual, how they like to be recognized, what are you recognizing, all your targets. It's a whole thing.
Well, and a lot of organizations have implemented engagement surveys at least annually, and some of them actually try to do actions on those.
Yep.
How are we doing for our employees?
Yeah. What would you add? How have you found balance in scorecards?
Yeah, I like is the juice worth the squeeze? The thing is, usually when you're working on something, you don't know enough to be able to figure that out. You're presented with one problem, you don't know all of the overhead costs that are around all of that. So I think of it from that balanced scorecard of, maybe we have these metrics on the floor that we're driving something around scrap reduction, and it's putting a lot of engineering hours in. But how are we measuring that function? So even as you talked about cost of quality, we did an initiative where we actually started feeling like we kept implementing more policies, more inspections, and it's like, whoa, I wonder what this actually costs us on these decisions. And so, of course, our quality metrics were all green. We're doing wonderful. But what were we paying for that?
Yeah.
So we did an analysis of looking at who's trained on which policies, how many policies do we have, all the training time, all the documents that are being managed. And then we did continuous improvement on that. So that was kind of the balanced scorecard that was a little bit different flair when you look at it from a function perspective, because, of course, a function interacts like a matrix across the organization of the work that they drive from a policy or a training. But that was a good balance for us that, I'd say, we continue to kind of refresh and go, okay, we want to make sure you're not worrying about all of that, just fix the problem, like drive that. But we need to be doing some of these other balanced improvements. And that doesn't need to happen. That's a big effort. That doesn't need to happen every year, but maybe every 3 to 5 years, kind of going and doing that refresh of, have we gotten a little out of control? Where are the biggest opportunities? And it's another way to drive that engagement of, those are usually your big pain points that people go, why are we doing so much of this? Why do I have to train on this too? So you can kind of address those at the same time.
I'm really excited about this next question because you're both with organizations that have different divisions or corporate and then multiple facilities. And I know that when you get big, it can be complex and matrixed, and yeah, there's a lot there. How do you make sure there's alignment between corporate and business units or whatever scenario you want to paint?
Yeah, well, on the manufacturing side, we have documented all of our best practices, and we use that one standard training. And once you're part of the organization, here's the metric board, and this is how we do things, and this is how we're going to recognize success. the piece about how we've defined those best practices is it came from a bunch of different, like benchmarking and acquisitions. So we never proclaim that this is the best. This is our active, continuing to learn and evolve. So we have our best practices documented, but we have like basically councils that are, it's their role to question them. If you had a better idea of why do we measure that in that way, okay, bring it to that council and let's continue to look at it. But then if we decide to do it, it's got to be deployed across the whole organization. But you would usually start with a pilot, learn from it, get that adoption before you make it a global standard. So it's challenging, takes a lot of change management effort, but I mean, it makes things so much simpler, and we have a lot of movement. Of course, as you think about developing your talent, it can be very difficult if you're going from one division that does things one way to now you're in another division who does it a different way, and now I have to speak corporate and that's a different way. Just trying to keep it all standard and the same. So it's a lot of upfront facilitation, alignment, piloting, but it's worth it in the end. So that's where we've really invested that to make sure that it doesn't, get out of control and become very complicated. But always, I think it's important as people come into the organization, of course, we're always acquiring new companies. People come with a lot of experience. This is how they did it before. And so why do we do it? And I think communicating that, hey, if you have a better idea, we're open to that. This is just the best way that we know how to do it right now. And that starts to really help that dialogue and engagement flip. Because if they really cared that much, they're going to put in the work to help change it. And if it, was just kind of a bit of a sticking point, but that's fine, I can live with this other way, then you move on and keep moving forward.
I appreciate how that just invites participation and invites people to say what they want to say, because it could be better, even though, hey, this is the current best way. I really appreciate it. What would you add?
Similarly, Integer is worldwide. I think we've got 20-some sites worldwide across the globe, and we became Integer through acquisition. So all of the individual sites they're small, little, doing their own thing, right? Yeah. As Integer continues to work through that, they've been embracing that and figuring out, all right, how we return value to our shareholders, because we are a publicly traded company, and we're watched all the time because of that. And we need to figure out how we actually operate across the entire business similarly. So we developed procedures, product development process, phase gate type development process. They rolled that out a couple of years, probably 3 years ago, the first iteration of that, and then let it land and said, all right, we want your feedback. And all of the sites tried to implement it and did their own thing and come up with a lot of different solutions as to how should we revise that so that it's not just burden. And we've continued, I think we've gone through, 3 different revisions since in the last 3 years that tries to help align all of the different organizations that are working together. Keep in mind that I work at the Brooklyn Park site, and we provide parts to, 11 other Integer sites worldwide. So there's a significant opportunity for us to interact with those other sites. And at the same time, those other sites working to the same PDP process ultimately now have some insight as to why it takes the time that it does for us to do what we need to do, because we're all now starting to talk some of the same language. So ultimately that does directly cascade down from our corporate level down to all the individual sites.
Okay.
So that helps to maintain that alignment. In addition to that, our corporate executive team has led Hoshin planning activities, and then that has filtered down what are the individual site goals that come out of those Hoshin planning activities as well.
Great. So I wanted to ask both of you about this next one. Christy, I'll kick it over to you first. How do you protect quality as a core metric and something that's just really important when you're constantly up against deadlines to meet, especially the on-time delivery?
Yeah, it's that balanced scorecard you can never just measure one thing. You have to have that balance. So of course, the delivery is important, but we need to do it at the right cost so that we can continue to develop the next generation of products. So So you have your groups that kind of own the different metrics and make sure that we're keeping honest and staying accountable. So that accountability of those metrics is probably something that I didn't talk about earlier. And that's true, you kind of have your natural function ownership of the different balanced scorecard metrics. And that's that leadership team's job to come together and make sure that, we're not compromising one for the other.
What would you say though, if one of the leaders on the team has a bonus attached to on-time delivery? How might you navigate that dynamic or even that conversation when an individual is getting a payout when it's on time?
Yeah. So I don't think that we're really in conflict, like delivering to the patient on time is our overall goal,
Yeah.
right? So that's the number one. So let's say you have to sacrifice some efficiency. You're gonna run some overtime and it's not gonna be as efficient, so you can hit the customer demand. Of course, we're gonna do that to meet customer demand and that's why I talked about having the priorities set so always at the center of the bullseye is the customer, meeting the customer needs. So of course, as everyday operations, we're talking about the balanced scorecard, but when it comes down to it, it's about the patient. But how can we be proactive in our communication, knowing we have a balanced scorecard, that you're not thinking in a silo and saying, I didn't tell you that I knew demand was going to double, and you could have prepared for that and thought about additional shifts and how to run operations efficiently. So everyone has to be connected to the overall dashboard together, and I think we've done a good job in sharing the performance together. The delivering to the patient will always be number one, but it's very rare that in our business things just happen. It's an emergency if someone suddenly needs so many medical devices. It's a little bit longer planning period than that, and just how do we make sure that we're driving the right conversations and people aren't thinking in those silos. And that goes with all of your stand-up meetings, all of the different collaboration meetings as you're looking at your metrics and talking about plans and what's coming up. So that's kind of how the whole system works together. I guess I haven't.
That's how it should work.
Yeah, I haven't seen, I can't even mention, think of an example in the last 5 years where it felt like it was really compromising one over the other. We all really knew it was the right thing to do, deliver for the patient. Okay, we're gonna see a tank in this metric right now, but here's what we're gonna do to proactively manage it.
Yeah, and the question was, to you, but almost through you too, for all the members watching this, because there are organizations out there and they have the one person with the one bonus, and that may not be driving the best decisions for the organization.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever experienced that tension or where there's a clash between like a financial driven organization, they also want to be continuous improvement oriented, and could you speak to that a little bit?
It's an interesting question. And at the core of Lean philosophy, it ultimately drives financial metrics. They're not in conflict with each other.
Let's talk about absorption rates maybe specifically then. What do you do when the finance leader says, hey, our absorption rates maybe aren't what they should be, and you guys don't want to build any more inventory because that's part of your lean thing?
It all comes back to getting the best value for whatever your investment is.
Okay.
Product sitting on your shelf, unless you've got some sort of agreement that your customer's paying you for it and you're doing customer managed or vendor managed inventory for them, is actually of no value if it just sits on your shelf.
Yeah.
There are some, we have some customers that we do VMI with, right? There's vendor managed inventory where we are actually maintaining stock for that customer, and they pay us for that.
Okay.
So in those
You're
cases,
not relying on a forecast, is what you're telling me.
for some of that,
I like it.
but that's not with all of our customers.
Okay.
A significant amount of our business, we are relying on a forecast, and oftentimes, going back to how do we measure, how do we balance things out between quality and all of those things, right? We incorporate that into our tier meetings. So we've got the tier one meetings where our operators are talking to their supervisor and escalating whatever the issues are of the day at that level.
Okay.
Tier two, it gets escalated up if they need any external support from that operations group. If they need engineering support or if they need some other support from outside of that group to help their problems.
Okay.
Anything that gets escalated from there gets escalated to our tier three meeting, which is all of our plant leadership team. And at that point, that's where the rubber hits the road, and if there's any conflict in priorities, that's where we ultimately run through those.
Okay.
We do a tier one or tier three meeting every single day, and we go through all of our standard SQDC, but we're also looking at our overall people metrics. We're looking at, what are our on-time delivery rates, what's our revenue looking like for this month, and we track it by week.
Okay.
So every single week, we're looking at what's our revenue look like. All right, do we have something that looks like we're going to miss delivery, and that's going to be a revenue hit.
Okay.
So what other levers of product can we slot into that or accelerate to make up for that revenue dip?
Yep.
And so we're doing that almost every single day, and then at least weekly we're doing deep dives in all of the different areas to go, all right, what else is going on? What else is in our strategy, radar over the course of the next few weeks?
Okay.
To identify, do we have those bottlenecks coming? Do we have, oh yes, that particular customer pulled that order back or told us they didn't want us to deliver it yet. Okay, so are we going to continue to tie up a machine making that product, or are we going to get off that machine, get that product off the machine, and put something else on that machine instead?
Yeah.
But those become plant leadership decisions, and then that ultimately drives or keeps priorities in focus, and then it gets filtered back down and gets communicated back down through the tiers.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I like it. So we only have, just a minute here, so 30 seconds or less for each of you. What kind of digital tools are out there or digital tools that you're using to collect and analyze all these metrics, all this data? Christy?
Yeah, so we have started using a new software called Celonis. Maybe you've heard of it, but it has been really interesting in overseeing a lot of our existing measures and can build like a process flow where you can start seeing what do things cost, where are things getting hung up within your SAP transactions. You can look at customer to cash, what's really happening. And it's been, we just kind of call it's like the Kaizen event on steroids of the part of like, where is the opportunity? So instead of bringing people together and saying, what do you think is an opportunity? We start now with, hey, we can see that there's $20 million stuck in this spot. Why is it happening? How do we prevent it? So that has been eye-opening to us of just new data and new measures that we didn't know how we would ever have visibility. Of course, we have tons of data, but we haven't had the ability to see it high level enough into a dashboard to say, here's some of the variation, here's some of the opportunity. How do we boil that down into a project to drive specific savings? So that has been one that we've been playing a lot with in the last 3 years that we learned from some other Fortune 500 companies. So that would be one gem that I would just pass on to maybe take a look at. Thank
you. Troy, last word here?
There are so many different sources of digital data in organizations, whether that be, the operations supervisor's personal Excel spreadsheet that he's doing for managing the daily activities, all the way to your ERP system, whether that's Oracle or SAP or whatever it might be, right? Oftentimes, organizations struggle to figure out how do you digest all of that. 25, 30 years ago, it was all crystal reports, right? Nowadays, Power BI is a tool that is highly, highly customizable to be able to pull data from all of those different sources and actually make some decent sense out of it that's relatable to the majority of people that are trying to look for it.
Yeah.
So we are still in, I'll say, fairly infant stages. We've been using it for about 2 years now, but there's just so much more that we could be using Power BI for.
Yeah.
And as we continue to build and enhance the data sources, we continue to figure out ways of how can we use Power BI, and also we've implemented a lot of SharePoint stuff too.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's the one that I hear all the time, Power BI. That particular set of tools seems like it's growing widely in adoption across manufacturers across the Midwest.
It is. Like you said, it's highly configurable, so and customizable, so you can really, really use it. Kind of like in the old days, Crystal Reports, you could make a report anything you want.
Yep.
And Power BI does that really well.
Thank you both very much for carving out time in your busy days. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, if you like these real world examples, but are maybe looking for more in-depth training, then take a look at our Lean Practitioner series of digital courses. Great opportunity to be guided step by step on how to do some of this stuff, and then also be able to learn at a time that works best for you because they're digital. Just fill out the form below and we'll send you more information. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next month.